Kia ora, my name's Rachel. I'm at the Wine Cellar. It's a Sunday afternoon. It's closed to the public, but it's open always in our hearts. And we're here with the man, the myth, the legend, Rohan, who has been running this space for 20 years. 20 years of the Wine Cellar. It seemed like a good idea at the time. That's the tagline, and we're here to work out whether it still is. That's the bit.
Okay. There's a lot to unpack.
Let's start at the beginning, Rohan. We've got lots of history to get stuck into, I feel, with this space, but I want to get into the history of you first. When did you get the bug? When did you sort of decide that it was going to be your life doing the music thing?
I've never been particularly good at planning out or doing things too carefully or with too much forethought. However, I was interested in gigs, in gigging and the live music sort of world pretty much straight from... I mean, I grew up in the Coromandel in Whitianga, which is not a particularly cosmopolitan place. But when I went to university in Hamilton, I went to Waikato, and I kind of was new in town. I didn't really know anyone, and I just went to the student radio station that was
Shout
there.
outs.
Rest in peace, Contact. You shall not be forgotten. One of the first radio stations to fall foul of the 90s student revolution of voluntary student unionism and divestment in cultural icons. So at the Contact offices, they were selling tickets to the orientation, and I had a little bit of money left over from paying fees and stuff like that, and I bought a ticket. Went, I know a couple of names on this list of bands.
Who was playing? Who were the bands?
In no particular order. Straight Jacket Fits, Headless Chickens, Fatal Jelly Space. Who else? Otis Mace. It was one of the last of, I think, what had been a late 80s wave of that emboldened flying nun stepping forth. And all through university, I was a regular going to gigs, and I had one of those the beginnings of an interest in sound engineering. Not that I did anything about it at the time, when friends that I made there started a band, and I was sort of like the hanger-on as these two friends sort of put together this band they were called Zangiacomo's Eastern Tour.
Nice.
A nice little Conrad reference. And they were kind of a hectic, violent femmes punk sort of acoustic nightmare for sound engineers.
There's a vibe, there's a feeling that comes through some of the troubadours, shall we say, that walk through the hallowed halls of the Wine Cellar, that maybe fits that energy a little bit too sometimes.
Let's just say that was a moment of an epiphany of sorts. Yeah, so... And then I didn't really do anything about it, and I tried to do an academic thing and ended up teaching English in Korea for what was going to be a year while I saved up to go and do a PhD in the UK. When I came back, I always wanted to maybe do a bar or some sort of music thing, and that's when I ended up going and seeing a space. And I rang up the number and met the very energetic and slightly eccentric gentleman who was the landlord, who took one look at me and my dad and asked what sort of thing we were wanting to do, and I said a bar, and he was like, I think I've got just the space for you. And he marched us across the road and into the arcade and down the stairs into what is the Wine Cellar, which you know, to be honest, wasn't looking a lot different, except it was a pile of joinery and sawdust and junk, because they'd been using it as the storeroom when they were renovating all the shop fronts in the top of the arcade. The rent at the time was feasible, and it was $300 a week plus OPEX, and I'm not going to say what it is now.
I was going to say we can just work that one out ourselves, probably. We've all read the news.
Yeah, there's a few zeros on the increase over the years.
K Road. How much has K Road changed in 20 years since you've been sitting here?
K Road changes every 4 years. And the more things change, the more it's exactly the same, bizarrely. Like the real big difference is just how much sort of housing and stuff like that has sort of atomized the groups that have been the backbone of K Road.
Those groups being
the artists,
yep,
the musicians, the students, the recently out of school finding their way in the world people are spread more thin. They used K Road, and I think before K Road, Ponsonby and Queen Street and High Street and Parnell, if one goes back to the 80s or whatever, were always places where there was like a sense of community and growth and different worlds, whether they were musical or arts or even just sort of engineering, or there was a lifestyle of flats and big flats and warehouse flats and things like that, which on K Road, like, I know that there are a few of the old living flat areas that are still there, but yeah, and that's really changed. And I think that when this place opened as a bar, there was a stream of people coming out of their jobs, whether they were sort of admin and business jobs downtown, or art students, or people with sort of like creative practices working and then on their way home to their flats in Greylin, or you know, living far out at Point Chev or something like that.
Who would do that?
Would be like quite. There'd be a lot of people, and they'd be coming up past or through this arcade up to catch a bus home, and they'd be meeting up with people at Verona, or they'd be catching a late coffee at Brazil, or they'd start popping down to the Wine Cellar kind of thing. And that was not necessarily just youth, but all sorts of people, and they would be catching up with people that they knew, and they'd be hopping home, and then they'd be coming out later on to go to an opening or a show, or because their friend was DJing at this place or whatever. And it felt very central,
mm-hmm,
and it felt quite urban and kind of like it was definitely not the Auckland that those of us that have lived in other parts of New Zealand didn't necessarily like. And I feel that whilst the food offerings and the restaurants and things like that are way more exciting on K Road, and there's a lot of great stuff, that it's quite different and quite like the population base is quite diluted because people live so far out. You know, the housing thing, the way that sort of Ponsonby and Greylin are actually depopulating.
Feels quite atomized.
Yeah, it's really it's atomized. And the internet age means that people also consume a lot of their interests through their phones or computers and stuff like that. And so they can find a community, but they don't necessarily meet them for drinks at Verona and write pop songs about meeting their partner at Verona anymore.
Insert song here. I want to know a wee bit about who some of your first bands were that came through the doors, Rohan. Who were you getting to play? Because you started as a bar. When did music start happening here?
Well, one of the first ones was Storehouse, and that was a young journalist by the name of Tom Rodwell came in, and he wanted to do a show here, and he was into doing sort of like, we'll just set up and we'll play and we'll sort of put money in the hat kind of thing. And usually I've got a few friends who'll come and they'll all have a drink, and we worked out a thing where they got some free drinks as well, or the band got some free drinks as well, and it was just a 2-piece sort of like bass and guitar and in a stomp box.
And where were they playing? Were they, because the venue room that people know and love is next door to where we're sitting in the bar. But where was Storehouse? Were they playing in this room?
Yeah, they played in this. They played in this room, and at that time, another one of our new regulars, she and a friend had started coming down here, and her name was Rachel Bailey, and she, after, I think she'd come along and seen a Storehouse show, and that was kind of cool. And then I'd let somebody do a poetry thing here that involved a certain amount of nudity. And
did you know the nudity was going to happen?
No,
or was that okay?
Nobody knew the nudity was going to happen.
Cool.
This continues my love-hate relationship with the spoken word poetry.
I think the first show I ever saw at the Wine Cellar was actually a poetry show. I think I saw a David Merritt show in what is now Whammy Backroom when I was probably 18 in my first year at uni.
Right.
So it would have been
10
years ago.
David and Dominic Hoey are always allowed to come in.
Doors always open.
Yeah, doors always open. It's safe enough to say now that Dom's mostly in Detroit, but yeah, so, and then Rachel was sort of like, can my band play a show? And that was the Broken Heartbreakers.
Oh, right.
Some other band, I think Nick Walsh's band, The Vacants, played, and that was just like you couldn't hear a word, like completely saturated. It was this wild rock and roll experience. That everybody loved, but I was like, I don't think it's kind of going to work in this space. And that's when we started looking for
a bigger room. So when did the venue room become a thing? When did you actually sort of take over that space?
Those with a longer memory of Auckland's nightlife will know that at the time that we opened, what is now the Whammy Bar area was a nightclub called Caliber that had been sort of like a breaks and house and drum and bass sort of hotspot. Immediately next door, what's now the Wine Cellar, was the landlord's wife and a friend had a business printing, like hand screen printing fancy Egyptian cotton bed sheets and things like that with sort of Gilded Age boho chic kind of.
Boho chic, nice.
That space was busy during the day and involved water blasting the screens in the alleyway of dubious smells. But the rest of the space was all part of Caliber's lease, and I approached them about using the room that's now a Whammy back room to do shows in. That relationship with the people who'd been running Caliber for a long time was okay. Then they sold it to another. Well, it changed hands in some circumstances, and the new operator of Caliber was a bit quite out of his depth, and I think had probably been misrepresented what he'd bought.
Yes, right.
and stuff like that, and he ended up being locked out by the landlord.
Not good for him, but maybe worked out well for the longevity of that space for you.
Then when he locked them out, I went, I really want to take over this room. Can we do that? And he was like, not splitting it up, but we'll lease you the whole space.
So you had it all for a while, Rowan.
And so that
your
was...
empire of dirt.
Yes, and so that was when Whammy happened. In order to keep the Wine Cellar having the back room.
I guess like zooming forward a little bit, because one thing the Wine Cellar I think is synonymous with now is being this little crucible for new and strange and challenging and nascent projects from people. Let's do a little sort of like highlights reel now, Rowan, perhaps.
There are so many, and if I forget you, it's not because I don't love you and I've forgotten you, it's just that I'm bad at remembering.
And I put Rowan on the spot, so you can blame me.
Okay, so I've already mentioned Broken Heartbreakers. There's a band called the Septembers, the songwriter of which is still operating mostly out of Hawke's Bay now, called Stretch. Stretch put on a show where I don't know where he met them from or how he knew about them. He got this young band called Teacups to open for them. And Teacups, for those that don't know, were the powerhouse first public band of a certain Liz and a certain Chelsea, with a bass player whose name was Tulula, I think, who now runs a French bakery chain in Indonesia and is hyper successful.
Nice.
And Beth has a little band called the Beths.
Just a small unknown.
And Chelsea Jade has been Chelsea Jade and Watercolors and is mostly a songwriter in LA.
Another small unknown,
small unknown artists. And it felt quite wrong. It's sort of like, have I gate crashed the 7th form music classroom in Epsom Girls Grammar? I kind of feel like I have. Is this really pop song, indie, twee pop referencing Harry Potter? It is.
It is.
Okay. Interesting.
I feel like folk has always had a home here. We've kind of touched on that a little bit, but it is definitely one of the big veins of the Wine Cellar. I think from my perspective, if I had to think about what is the sound of the Wine Cellar, to me it is like there's folk music, there's weirdo, complete free jazz soundscapes, helmed by the folks, like
improvised music
music space. There's noise. And then there's the indies, which is a bit of a, little bit more of a kind of ephemeral clump, perhaps, of lots of different genre sounds.
Well, the folk thing was definitely part of the Wine Cellar. At that time, there were places like, bad memory. There were various different indie band locations, and the King's Arms was going, and so I saw the Wine Cellar as a way to have a venue for little things, starting out things, and not necessarily extremely loud things. Like the noise music and the experimental music and the free jazz stuff isn't, like, it might be more abrasive, but it isn't often louder than a pretty ordinary rock band.
Yeah.
They're usually far more loud. They're just arguably less interesting, or, now
that we've got Rowan to the bottom of his 2% beer, the hot takes are coming out.
Once we stopped doing shows in this room and started doing shows out in what's now back room, I was constantly in a little bit of a fight with the little PA that I had at the time, and to not do the loud bands.
Yeah.
To try and find our niche.
Yeah. And
do the quieter things. And stuff like Storehouse and the Broken Heartbreakers probably paved the way. My good friend and sorely missed, sadly departed friend, Sam Preble, with the Bond Street Bridge Band and stuff like that, was always, whilst Sam was very loud, or could be very loud, that was an oddball songwriting thing. And then we had people coming up from Christchurch like Delaney Davidson and Adam McGrath and Jesse Shanks, who were like the core members of the Eastern, and associated members of the Eastern, like a certain Hannah Harding, who was
little known artist,
better known as Aldous Harding, who I think played her first show as, I think it was still as Hannah Harding, with another young artist called Nadia Reid, who did a show together with Ivy Rossiter, who I can't remember what Ivy's, who now makes electronic music in Berlin, as you do.
The Wine Cellar folk to Berlin electronic music pipeline is actually way more direct than people might expect, Rowan, I feel. There's a lot of people who've made that. Many shows at the Wine Cellar, many shows in Berlin.
Noise acts to Berlin.
That's just a highway.
And then becoming, yeah, I mean, that's very real. Although I've heard Leipzig is the cheaper place to go now.
Yeah. Hot tip for young guns.
Those have told us. And so those are all things that kind of separated the Wine Cellar a little bit, while a lot of the other rock stuff was going on at the other venues that they were. And then as those venues dwindled, and then we got Whammy Bar, and we probably got our first real PA rather than, powered speakers on poles that we could pack down and move away. And I got more into engineering, and we could make it work. The whole Wine Cellar didn't have to be quiet, but it already had the cachet that if you were going to do a singer-songwritery thing, then the Wine Cellar is a nice place to go, because it's not like nothing worse than doing a singer-songwriter thing in a big rock venue when there's nowhere to sit down. And we had couches, and people are still disappointed sometimes, some of the older crowd, when they come to, oh, my friend's playing there, oh, yeah, we'll go out. Oh, it's a Wine Cellar. I thought there were couches and places to sit down, and now I have to stand up for a whole 2 hours while Nadia Reid
plays beautiful music at me,
but I have to stand up.
Life's so hard.
And it was like this being pulled both ways, because other bands go, oh, I'd love to play at the Wine Cellar, but I can't be like rockier bands.
There's too many fucking couches.
Yeah, I can't be bothered with, I can't play to people sitting down.
You can't win.
It's sort of like, literally can't win.
No. Okay, so lots of lives that the Cellar has lived. A lot of different music that's come through here. Presently, how do you see the scene that hangs out at Cellar, Rowan?
They are my children. We look after them. We hope they do well.
They're always welcome here.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I see it a little differently over time, but the community side of it, even though things are more atomized in an extent, just through everyone having to hustle a little harder. There's a book, Talking Heads lead singer, How Music Works.
Thank you, Callum.
Chapter in How Music Works about the sort of importance, or how he saw the importance of places like CBGBs being not just about the bands that played there and how the venue worked for those bands, but how it worked for the musicians from all sorts of bands, being a place where they could socialize and see each other, and how in places where things are more coldly commercial, or the production scale is bigger, you don't get that, and how he was not in favor of too many green rooms and things like that, and harking back to the place where, at the end of the show, the musicians and the audience, that barrier sort of breaks a little bit, where you've got actual friends who were there, who also do music or some other form of art, and how that sort of sharing can be quite a fertile thing. And that's, like, I feel an immense amount of sort of pride with other people that I've worked with, and people like Mason Ferry and Vicky, who it is a technical thing with knowledge and requirements, but the main thing is problem solving and personability and understanding, not to be too snobby, not understanding the music necessarily in a technical musicological way, but understanding what it's like to get up on stage.
100%. That's play. So important.
Like I kind of, as a background as a historian and social sciences, I kind of see it as a holistic thing. And
then also for the bands as well that have come through here.
Yeah.
Just, we've been talking about Liz Stokes. The Beths are literally playing Coachella as we speak right now, which is crazy. Like, that's mind-boggling. It's so deserved, but it is pretty crazy when you're sitting in the Wine Cellar to think about those massive stages too.
I remember sitting down after a Wine Cellar birthday show where I'd got the Beths to play, and Jonathan couldn't play because he was on tour with Princess Chelsea, and Liz and Ben decided to do the show anyway. And I remember talking to Lou afterwards, going, I love the Beths. I know it's unfair, but one day the rest of the world's going to realise how great they are, and then we'll never see them again, and that makes me sad. And the good news is that we still see them.
We do still see them, yeah.
And I like to think that the eclecticism, like the Beths didn't come from nowhere, and they played in some pretty odd and eclectic bands to get to where they are, to be in that band. Like,
it's
all the
rhizomatic.
It's there's so many different things,
yeah.
and it's quite eclectic, and I think that we've been fostering the eclecticism of Auckland.
And you make it a space that people can come back to, because I think I've been, I think that the Wine Cellar is the first venue I went to as a student. This is somewhere I could see myself hanging out. This was way before I did any student radio stuff, and being able to come here and find people, find a little crew, find friends, start to recognize faces, and then be here on a Friday or a Saturday night and see faces that are like stars to you. It's a pretty special experience, and I think it lifts people up as well. And you've made it a space that people can keep coming back to too.
That goes back to the original idea of the bar. Like, dive bar's a word that gets used, and I think my idea when I was setting up the Wine Cellar was sort of like, well, I'm not trying to be any of those really glitzy cocktail bar.
I think you've made a comfortable space, but that comfort is not doesn't mean it's not open for challenging experiences musically. Like that, you can come in here and have a comfortable time watching a crazy band. You can.
That's the only way to see
exactly
a great band.
A great band, exactly. And I think that that's something that, for me, when I've been talking to people about like, well, what does the Wine Cellar mean to them? That's always been a big thing that's come up. It is the sort of gathering place for Auckland's weirdos, Auckland's music nerds to come and hang out and have somewhere that feels homely and like a space they want to be in.
Yeah, and there's always swings and roundabouts, and things being glitzy and upmarket have their place. And I feel that, I've always pushed the more sort of, like, the main thing is really the friends that you're with or what you're seeing, being comfortable. Don't really want to have things too much guest lists or queues out the door. I remember being quite horrified the first time we actually had to shut things off because we were full of capacity, and it's like, I don't want to be that place, but I guess too many people want to see this band. You guys can come back.
To bring this full circle, Rohan, 20 years of the Wine Cellar, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Why'd you do it? Rohan?
It's all it's a circular question, because it seemed a good idea at the time. Sorry.
Got any parting comments for us?
No, that's probably enough nonsense from me.
Bye-bye.